Hey, I'm Angelo Pinto, and welcome to Let It Rip. We're coming to you from the shadow of the Empire State Building in New York City. New York City's political establishment just got rocked, fueled by the Democratic Socialists of America and the meteoric rise of Zoran Mamdani. Voters rejected longtime Democratic incumbents and embraced the new progressive movement that says it's building a more equitable New York. But critics say there's another story unfolding. They argue today's DSA has become a movement whose energy and electoral strength increasingly come from a newer, wider, more affluent neighborhoods, raising uncomfortable questions about whether politics claiming to speak for working-class New Yorkers is sidelining the very black and brown communities that built the city's progressive tradition. A recent Gothamist article, You're Next, the black and Latino New Yorkers feeling burned by Mamdani's primary sweep, captures that frustration, with some longtime New Yorkers arguing this wave is as much a product of gentrification and displacement as it is of grassroots organizing. Others push back just as forcefully. They argue this isn't about replacing black political power, it's about reclaiming a legacy of black socialism, multiracial working class organizing, and challenging what they see as generation of black corporate Democrats who've grown too comfortable with the political status quo. So what are we witnessing? A long overdue political revolution? Or a progressive movement whose biggest winners are the newest New Yorkers while longtime communities lose influence? Joining us are two newly elected Democratic nominees and insurgent voices, Tyrell Huntley and Christian Celeste Tate. I'm Angelo Pinto, and this is Let It Rip. So Ian, congratulations, first, both of you. But what are we witnessing? Is this, as many have framed it, insurgents of white gentrifiers? Is it black voter fatigue? What would you say from your election and the overall kind of elections that we're witnessing in this political moment?
Thank you, Angelo. I reject both of those premises outright. This is definitely a culmination of a moment that has been built long before these races. It's a failure of the establishment in the long term and in the more recent to deliver a meaningful politics that addresses the conditions of what people are facing in our communities. It also is about, because I know in my race, and I'm sure in Christian and all the other races, with the wins that we had with these leads, in my case 21 points, in Christian's case 22, we won black majority voters, as well as a majority of other voters as well. This is a politics that truly speaks to what people are experiencing, but also addresses those things. It addresses the affordability of housing. It addresses the unaffordability of housing, the unaffordability of childcare, the unaffordability to raise a family here in the city like so many people are trying to do, like I have grown up doing.
So, Christian, do you feel the same? Many folks are saying, you know, when you look at displacement of black folks, there has had to be some kind of impact on kind of the electorate in that moment. What are you seeing? What do you believe happened in your election?
Yeah, so I agree with what Ian said. I think what we're seeing here is movement building. And you can't possibly ascribe these wins to any one group of people, nor can you ascribe the benefits to one group of people, right? The campaigns that we just ran and others were about building working class power and leveraging that solidarity to create a government that works for our people, for all of our people. And I know myself and Ian as well, you know, we're in the Fred Hampton tradition, right? The only way that we will have the working class movement that we deserve is if it is a cross-racial one. And the work that we just did as part of this campaign and will continue to do in the assembly is about continuing to build that movement. It won't happen overnight, right? You're not gonna look at any one election's outcome, any one of those election results and say, wow, we did it. We have a cross-racial movement now. It's slow work, and you gotta keep working at it, and we're on that path.
Now, when folks say affordability, right? Many folks say affordability means two different things when you look at black folks in the city, white folks in the city, or really any place in the country. How do you reconcile those pieces when political kind of campaigning points mean very different things to two different groups?
Yeah, I mean, those are deeply intertwined to me. You know, I think back to when the administration released the racial equity plan and the affordability analysis, right? We saw firsthand how deeply intertwined these two conversations are. We cannot talk about affordability without also talking about racial equity. And we can't talk about racial equity in New York City without talking about affordability. In the past 5 years, we've gained over 13,000 millionaires and lost 200,000 black families. So it's exactly like you said. When we talk about affordability, it's affordability for who? And when we talk about movement building, whose movement is it? These are important questions, and the answer, again, is that it's all of ours.
And to add to what Christian said, I mean, this is so important. Those 200,000 families that have left New York, they left because of the affordability issue here. They left because of how expensive it is to raise a family here. They left because rising rents are unaffordable for most people, even the people that have grown up here their entirety of their life, like myself and like others. And this is really what this is about. It's addressing a black agenda, but it's also addressing broadly what people are supporting of all demographics in our community across Brooklyn and across New York.
When folks take a closer look at the racial equity plan and they say the DEI components, diversity, equity, and inclusion components have been removed, and that kind of signals something as well, what is your response to that?
I mean, these things are really important. I think that it really is about the political climate that we're navigating in, unfortunately, where we have a racist fascist in the White House, someone who has a armed private army, essentially, in ICE, that he's deployed where he has assassinated American citizens on the street and where our immigrant brothers and sisters are dying in detention. And that's what we're up against. And so there is some caution that I think people are having and navigating in this world, but I don't think that that should stop us from still fighting for those things and still advocating for those things. And even if they're not contained in this document, we know that these need to be a part of what happens in this plan and also what happens in our city and our state.
And how do we determine where and when we fight or don't fight? So there's this racial equity piece, DEI is pulled out. Of course, many folks say this is hugely problematic. Then you have ICE, right? And you have Zoran making a statement recently was like, ICE is not going to be allowed into certain spaces in the city. And it could appear that he's kind of cherry picking which issues he's going to draw a hard line on and ones he's not. What do you both say to that?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, it's not a question of when we fight and when we don't fight, because we have to fight. The question is, how do we fight? And we might fight differently on each front of this battle, but the important thing is that we fight on each front of this battle. And I also think, per what Ian just said, I think we have to recognize, as I think we're doing more and more, that racial equity work cannot be compartmentalized. You cannot have a governance plan and say this over here is the racial equity part of it, right? In order to do that work justice, it has to be embedded in every single part of how you govern, how you legislate, and how you advocate. And so I think the two are inseparable, right? You can't do one and not the other.
Do you think New York is going to create a kind of space where that can happen? Because many would say that we've never had the kind of governance where governance was interwoven with a racial equity plan or a plan that was forward thinking around race. Are we in a place where we will see this?
Well, we never had a 35, 36-year-old socialist mayor elected with a broad majority of the community across New York City before. And we've also never witnessed a slate of socialists in modern era, 10 of us that ran, and 9 of us winning our elections. So we've never seen that before either in our lifetime. So I think the question isn't about what is possible, it's about what will we do, because everything is possible.
I mean, and that's something for us to talk about too, this whole, what's Zoran's impact on all of this? Like, what has his win meant for this? But the other piece is this DSA, this larger piece around DSA, and certain folks, particularly black folks, not feeling welcomed in DSA. What do you say to that? Do you think that is something the movement will have to address, DSA, or do you think it's not true?
Yeah, so I think, again, that the work of movement building needs to be cross-racial, right? It needs to be intergenerational. It needs to be broadly inclusive. And that work is not quick. That work is not going to happen overnight. But we are doing that work, broadly speaking, to build the coalition as best we can. And I think it's also important that we, for sure, give DSA credit where credit is due, right? They are a central piece of this movement that is unfolding in front of us. But we also have to acknowledge that they're not the only piece, right? And
What
so,
are the other pieces?
So, I mean, so Ian and I both are in leadership roles with New York Communities for Change, right? Working Families Party is another one. Drum Beats is another one. CAV, like there are, the list goes on.
So there was a
and on.
coalition of folks that have kind of
100%.
created this moment and this political movement.
100%. And that doesn't take away from DSA's role in making this and in pushing this movement forward, right? But when we're going to talk about building the movement broadly that represents New York City, we can't only talk about
Why
DSA.
do you think DSA has been kind of placed front and center in the conversation, though? Because most folks aren't going to mention working families parties and others. It's like DSA. This is a DSA. Why do you think that's happening?
I mean, many of the people who are part of these other orgs, like myself and Christian, are also members of DSA. So there's an overlap. And I just think that DSA, though, has a very organized method of building up candidates that come from organizing backgrounds from within DSA, but also within their community, and then also represent a very cohesive politics that are very much speaking to the moment. So I think that that's what it is. The DSA really represents the politics that has a very clear vision for what it is that working class people are asking for and demanding and need in our state here in New York, but across the country, which is why we see that success, not just here in New York City, not just here in New York State, but in Washington, D.C.
Things are changing. Do you feel like this is kind of the Zoran effect continuing, or do you feel like it's a continuation of something much broader and larger than that? Because I think a lot of folks are saying, you have to give a lot of credit for these wins to Zoran as much as DSA in this moment. What is your take on those pieces?
I think it's both. I don't think you have to pick between giving Zoran credit and acknowledging that there is a bigger movement that is moving underneath us, right? I think that as organizers, our job is to take the baton from those who came before us and to carry it as far forward as we can, right? Because the work we're doing is not a sprint, but it's also not a marathon. It's a relay race, and that happens intergenerationally. And again, I don't think that takes away from DSA or from the mayor or what they've done, right? It's just about acknowledging their place within the broader movement, and to me, that gives it all the more power. That doesn't detract from it.
One of the things that's been so powerful with all of your elections and Zoran and DSA is the media piece, right? It's been kind of a landslide victory in that regard. And many folks are now saying, how do you electeds now protect black media? Do you see that as something important when you look at programs like Let It Rip? Is this something that is a part of your agenda, and how do you see that unfolding in the years to come?
Yeah, absolutely. You saying this makes me have flashbacks to my mother watching Like It Is, and the kind of programming that was on in the background and backdrop of my life, and even passively consuming. And I think that is so important, that we have Black political power is very much, when you think about it, is in the South and also in New York. And part of that political power comes with voice. And so it is, I think, even more incumbent of us to champion new voices and new media, which we that have been people of color who've actually been very much involved in helping to get out this message of this campaign, and also being on shows like Let It Rip. It is very much the outside of the mainstream establishment that offers the full picture, and also the new media that is also outside of the establishment that represents the generational change that we also represent.
Powerful conversation. We'll have to stay on top of it. Let's take a short break, and when we come back, we'll take a deeper dive into this new political movement in New York City. I'm Angelo Pinto, and this is Let It Rip. Everybody wants to call themselves progressive these days, but somewhere along the way, progressive became shorthand for DSA. So there's a question: can you be black, unapologetic, left, and not fall in line with either political camp? Some say the Democratic establishment wraps itself in blackness every election season, then tells black communities to wait their turn. Others say camps like DSA are so focused on class that race becomes an inconvenience instead of a starting point. So who's actually fighting for black New Yorkers, not just talking about them? What does it look like to govern from a black progressive vision in this moment? Joining us is New York City Council member Althea Stevens and co-chair of the Progressive Caucus and New York City Council member Sandy Nurse. Sandy, I'm going to ask you, what does it look like to govern from a Black, unapologetic, and progressive position? Oftentimes you hear these terms like affordability, and those catchphrases can be different from the actual governance. But tell us, what does it look like to govern that way?
Yeah, I think it looks like governing for those who have the least, right? I think as a leftist and someone who identifies as Black, I always think about the working poor who has the least. And if your efforts are focused on improving the material conditions, the day-to-day conditions for people, their housing situation, their ability to move through life, their mobility, their ability to secure something for themselves and for their future and their children, that is where you're going to be able to govern for Black people. I think in New York City, there's no shortage of Black leadership in the Democratic Party and in office. And we've had it for a long time, but I think there is thankfully, a growing Black left movement that is very, very clear about its politics, its values, its vision. It is clear that we cannot use the same playbook. It's clear we cannot take money from corporations, certainly now AIPAC, absolutely not. It's a different type of politic that's focused on, yes, class and race, and I think there's a way to do both, and I think there are some of us who are doing both.
Councilwoman Stevens, same question. What does it look like to govern Black, unapologetic, and progressive in this moment, and do those catchphrases of affordability make it more challenging to do so?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of things my colleague, Councilmember Nurse, spoke about. I think making sure that we are putting the people who are most vulnerable at the forefront of the decisions that we're making. And sometimes that's not the case for a lot of folks who even consider themselves progressive, and thinking about how do we make sure that allocations are being distributed in communities that have been left out of these conversations and have been, has been undervalued. How do we make sure that people who don't feel like the government listens to them or has ever showed up for them and actually has done things to harm them are actually having a seat at the table? I think that is so important that we are having this moment where we are actually pushing Black people to have a real conversation. Are we going to get in this and fight? I know that, some of this is around some fatigue because Black folks have been carrying this democracy on their back, but we have to be honest about what does it look like for people to be in this fight, and how do we continue to make sure that people are showing up day to day to be a part of this conversation, and how do we continuously get young people to be civically engaged? Because I think that that's another piece that we don't talk about, that we are not encouraging young people to be a part of this process, and they don't feel a part of the process. And so when you have other groups like DSA who are open to those things, they feel like they have a home.
And Councilwoman Stevens, you mentioned this idea of putting communities at the center of the conversations and governance, and you recently voted no on the budget. Was that you doing that in that moment? How difficult was it? And why did you make the decision to do so in this particular political moment?
I mean, I represent a district in the Bronx. Part of my district is, they've been saying this for years, it's one of the poorest congressional districts. And so when I'm looking at a budget, and there were great things in the budget, and there was great things that the PC, the Progressive Caucus and the City Council fought for, like city FAPs and fair fares and those things, which are going to really help a lot of people throughout the city. But when we're looking and talking about the Bronx, we have every element that everyone is always talking about. When we're talking about food insecurity, when we're talking about gun violence, when we're talking about affordability crisis around housing, all of those things are taking place in the Bronx. But we never seem to get our fair share of the pie. And a district like mine, when I'm looking at the allocations across the city, and they're going to some of the highest income districts, I have to really take a look at that and let my community know that, no, this is not enough. We're not going to continue to stand for what people think we deserve. We deserve it all. And again, my district is also slated to have the most supportive housing in the city in the next 2 to 3 years. And I say this all the time. If you're going to give me more things that I have to deal with, I need more resources to deal with that. I have over 30 shelters in my district. I have the most supportive housing. We have 2 reentry programs. And so we have a lot of people in my district who has needs. And I need to make sure that this city is showing up and giving them the resources that they need to be able to thrive in this community.
And Councilwoman Nurse, you see decisions like that sometimes where Black women say, you know what, I'm not going to necessarily go with the status quo because it doesn't serve my community. How do other elected officials, or do other elected officials stand with each other in those moments? You mentioned kind of this growing left that you're seeing happening. Is there solidarity amongst these folks? Do they stand together? How does that work in those particular moments?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Councilmember Stevens did was appropriate and right, and I stand by her in that decision. I've voted no on 2 budgets in the past.
So it's
right?
nothing new for you?
It's not new for me. It's taken me a lot to get to voting yes, and we have been fighting for a just budget for a long time, and that fight predates me in the council and us in the council, and it comes from decades of movements here. I think that in terms of as it relates to a growing Black left, I do think there is solidarity there in that we are Black people, but there are differences, right? And there are political differences. There are points of view that are not necessarily aligned 100%. There is sunlight, right? And I think our goal, and I know that Councilmember Stevens and I, along with other of our other Black colleagues in the council and at the state, have been working very hard to try to find how do we have those conversations in a way that is respectful, dignified, but also real, right? Like, we actually need people to champion things that work for people. We need healthcare. We need our rents to go down. We need higher wages. Like, we need things, as Councilmember Stevens said, and we need our Black electeds at all levels of government to step up to the plate and say, yes, I'm voting for those things. Yes, I'm championing those things, and not necessarily capitulate or compromise to whatever their speakers have or their House speakers are. We really have to have stiff spines in this moment. I mean, it's very clear that if folks don't stand up, they will be voted out. I mean, you look at Christian and Eon here, right? It is very clear you have you have Chi, Jabari, Eon, Christian, myself.
A new wave,
like,
so to
people are
speak.
coming in, and you have to be clear on what you're doing, what you stand for, and people are going to be looking for you. What are you voting for? How are you fighting for things? And if you're not there, it feels like you will be checked. And I
how
think
you
that's
govern,
important.
to your point.
Yeah.
Councilwoman Stevens, let's talk a little bit more about this Black left, even beyond political kind of affiliations. You've done some of the work of galvanizing Black electeds and folks beyond kind of the elected sphere. Why is that important? What would you like to see happen over the course of the next year? And how does that influence kind of governance and all the political pieces that actually matter to communities in a real way?
Well, I think it's so important that like Black leaders are all together talking and working, even if they're not necessarily all aligned and are considered left. Because one, I truly believe that we need to have a plan, right? When we're talking about, this person didn't deliver, that person delivered. How are we going to ask people to deliver when we don't have a clear, concise plan on what the Black community wants and what we need in this moment? So one, I have been working really hard to bring Black folks together, like Councilmember Nurse said, at the state level, with the state and the city just coming together, having difficult conversations. But I think that it's also important for us to create a plan and then also hold people and each other accountable. How are we having real wins for the Black community? How are we showing up in spaces and making it okay for Black people to say, we have needs? And one of the things that one of my colleagues always says is, when Black people win, we bring everybody with us. So this isn't just a conversation about how do we make sure that, Black people are winning. Well, that conversation pushes the envelope forward. When you think about the civil rights movement, you think about any movement in this country and Black people were winning, that benefited the masses. And so again, we as the Black community and Black leaders have to come together to really have a plan and make sure that we're holding people accountable and also have people be a part of that. Because here's the thing, I say this all the time, we cannot govern alone. Governance is a group activity. So everyone needs to be a part of this, including people who don't have titles, including our communities. They need to show up and be a part of this fight as well, and also come up with solutions and be a part of it. And that's why it's been so important for me for us to continue to have conversations and create space for us to do those things and build out infrastructures, right? When we're thinking about like nonprofits and Black grassroots organizations, a lot of them struggle to get funding. How are we supporting those groups? How are we putting money into those infrastructures? And one of the things that I've been really proud of is last year with the Black council members, we were able to lobby and get funding in the budget for Black organizations, which was not here before. And it's so crucial and needed in this time and this moment for us to not only continue to expand that money, but to continue to help and support Black organizations so they can help with the civic engagement and the work of bringing folks together.
And Councilwoman Nurse, you did some work of your own around CORE and making sure this racial equity plan happens, but also supporting kind of the independent entities that are making sure the city honors kind of what it's supposed to honor. Why do you think it's important? How do you see that as important in even your tenure of pushing to make sure those independent agencies and racial equity stay a kind of a mainstay of what the city does?
Well, first of all, it's the law, right?
That part.
New Yorkers voted for this overwhelmingly, and so it's not an option.
Yeah.
There's no flexibility allowed here. We have to move it forward, and it has to be resourced to do well, right? We're not half-stepping this. We need to do it right. And I think to speak to even the example of what Councilmember Stevens said, where she had to vote no on the budget, that's because she individually has to advocate for her district in the political structure that we have. If we have a just budget that has racial equity built into the DNA of its mechanisms and how it even is thinking about allocations or how it's thinking about where resources should go, she wouldn't need to be championing her district as loudly as possible or having to take these types of stands, right? It's not to be a burden on just an individual elected official. It is actually the collective responsibility, as written in the charter at this point, of the city to do that, so that we spend less time having to kick and scream to get resources to the South Bronx or Brownsville or East New York, or be penalized or punished if we don't go along with what a particular leader wants. It is baked into how the ground that we're already walking on, right? And so that's why that work is so important. It's certainly not resourced to where it needs to be, and it's unfortunate that, you know, the Independent Commission has really had to spend a lot of time on that. But again, it also speaks to organizing and the need for organizing, and that's why that civic engagement money for Black organizing is so important. We're losing Black New Yorkers, and so we need to infuse energy, resources, knowledge, training into building up Black organizing to assert a Black voice, political voice, into these processes, so we don't have to fight so hard.
That's right.
As individuals with these things on our backs, but as a collective, that we turn around and there's people with us.
We're doing it together.
Yeah.
Excellent conversation. I'd like to thank our guests. We'll take a short break, and when I come back, I'll share my final thoughts. I'm Angelo Pinto, and this is Let It Rip. Campaigning as a Black progressive in this moment requires holding two truths at once. First, we have to speak directly to the lived realities of communities that have too often been overlooked, underestimated, or left behind. But second, we have to recognize that the solutions we fight for, good schools, affordable health care, living wages, safe neighborhoods, and dignified housing are not niche policies. Targeted communities aren't about exclusion. They're about precision. If a community has been disproportionately harmed by discrimination, disinvestment, or unequal access to opportunity, then that community deserves intentional investment and tailored solutions. That's how we close gaps instead of simply acknowledging them. Campaigning this way requires honesty and courage. Governing this way requires discipline and accountability. Real justice isn't measured by whether everyone gets the same thing, it's measured by whether everyone has a genuine opportunity to thrive. That's the kind of leadership I believe this moment demands. Being a Black progressive today means refusing the false choice between representation and results. Representation matters because it shapes whose voices are heard. Results matter because they improve people's lives. The goal is to deliver both: leadership rooted in lived experiences and policies that expand opportunity, dignity, and justice for every community. I'm Angelo Pinto, and this is Let It Rip.